We're going to begin our show with this breakthrough on Capitol Hill. President Trump's sweeping tax cut and spending bill is one step closer to his desk after narrowly winning approval on Tuesday in the Senate. In what was a record-breaking vote-a-rama, that's a technical term, more than 45 amendments were voted on.
Vice President J.D. Vance was called in to cast the tie-breaking vote. That's because senators were split 50-50. Three Republicans, Senators Rand Paul of Kentucky, Tom Tillis of North Carolina, and Susan Collins of Maine, joined 47 Democrats in voting no. The bill now heads to the House, which will need to pass the Senate version quickly to meet President Trump's July 4th deadline. Well, House approval is not guaranteed. House Speaker Mike Johnson said he was confident they'll get it done by the end of the week.
We knew the Senate would amend the House product. I encouraged them to amend it as lightly as possible. They went a little further than many of us would have preferred. But we have the product now. As the president said, it's his bill. It's not a House bill. It's not a Senate bill. It's the American people's bill. And my objective and my responsibility is to get that bill over the line.
We've got a team standing by to talk more about this. We're going to start things off with NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Julie Sirkin. So, Julie, Republicans couldn't do it without that yes from Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski. Walk us through what changes had to be made to the bill to finally get it through the Senate and just some of the reaction we're now hearing.
Yeah, hey guys, good morning. Well, Republican leadership in the Senate has been working Lisa Murkowski for weeks because they knew that they needed her vote in order to move it forward. Vice President Vance cast that tie-breaking vote, his office touting his involvement to me last night. But it was really those side room deals between these holdouts, including Murkowski and Republican leadership, that made the deal come together in the end. I'm talking about things like the changes that were made to the clean energy tax credits that the House phased out in the last, literally, 11th hour before they voted on this. They removed an additional tax that was slapped on solar and wind producers in the U.S. They also changed a little bit of what we saw with the Medicaid cuts, still very, very extreme in this bill, and that's something that Murkowski had acknowledged, but they did plus up a fund for rural hospitals and some other changes as well. Take a listen to a little bit of the dynamic between what Murkowski and moderates like her gained from this bill and some of what Rand Paul and the conservative deficit hawks lost, because the bill adds $3.2 trillion to the deficit. Watch this.
There was a time in which they had to make a decision dealing with me and reducing the debt ceiling or giving pork and subsidies to Alaska. They chose to add more pork and subsidies for Alaska to secure that vote.
I advocated for my state's interests. I will continue to do that, and I will make no excuses for doing that. Do I like this bill? No. Because I tried to take care of Alaska's interests.
Murkowski also criticized what she called an artificial deadline for this bill. Regardless, it's heading back to the House. Murkowski saying she doesn't want them to pass it, though.
So now, Julie, how soon could the House start voting on the bill, and what kind of hurdles might it face?
Guys, in a couple of hours from now, because Speaker Johnson is really trying to muscle this through overnight. They actually got through that first step, passing it through the Rules Committee in the House. Of course, both chambers have different rules that govern them. But in the House, it will definitely be an uphill battle. You could see that just based on that Rules Committee vote. Two Republicans on that panel, Chip Roy and Ralph Norman, voted no. That doesn't mean that they will be no votes on the floor, but they are angry about how much this bill adds to the deficit. They are angry that it fell short of the $2 trillion promise to cut the deficit that Speaker Johnson laid out. They are frustrated by the cuts to this bill. Speaker Johnson, however, planning and plotting a vote for later today. Of course, the initial one will be a procedural vote. That will be a very key test vote for us to see how many Republicans he can lose. He can only lose about 2 to 3. And the vote passed the first time around, a very different version of this bill with just one Republican vote. So this is going to be an extremely tight process for Mike Johnson, especially if he wants to get it to the president's desk tomorrow.
And Julie, assuming that happens and that it gets signed into law, let's talk about who are the winners and losers here. We know nonpartisan estimates have shown the highest earners will get more money, the poorest Americans will lose money. Break it down for us.
Yeah, and about 12 million people will be left uninsured, according to the Congressional Budget Office, which is a nonpartisan entity, even though Republicans are slamming it as partisan, saying that it's not really what the bill does. There are a couple of winners and losers, as you laid out. Of course, the uninsured Americans go into the losers column, but you've also seen some winners in the fossil fuel industry. You see that there on your screen. High-income households, also some middle-class income households, because, of course, this extends those 2017 tax cuts. You also have corporations that benefit from this bill. Remember, some Republicans at the 11th hour amendment vote tried to put a tax on high-income earners. That vote failed, which I thought was really interesting. But still, you have a bill that, of course, makes significant losses to, like I mentioned, those uninsured Americans, but also to the solar and wind energies, the clean energy producers, people that won out after the Inflation Reduction Act was passed and signed into law. People are now very nervous about how this could set the U.S. back in trying to be a leader in the renewable energy space. But still, Republicans tout this bill as a major win, again, for those middle-class families, and also Americans living in blue states. Republicans in those states were able to secure a higher state and local tax deduction cap that is very important for those who live in the suburbs of New York and Chicago and other blue cities as well.
All right, Julie Sirkin, thank you so much.
Let's now bring in NBC News Chief White House correspondent Peter Alexander on this. Peter, good morning. So what are we hearing from the president now that the bill has passed through the Senate?
Well, this has the potential to be a major win for the president. It could happen on his desk on time. He wanted it by July 4th. As Julie said, the first significant votes begin this morning. They could have a final vote before this day is over. The president hoping for a celebration here on this very front tomorrow. He posted a long statement about it, calling this an early victory. The Senate's vote in support of this bill. And he said that Medicaid, among other benefits, will not be touched. Again, as we have noted, independent analyses have repeatedly showed that many of those who benefit from Medicaid will ultimately lose their coverage as a function of this right now. But now his pressure campaign focuses on the House, trying to get a victory there. Here's part of what we heard from the president. Take a listen.
I think it's going to do very well in the House. We'll see how that works out, but it looks like it's ahead of schedule. See what happens. Happy about it. I felt the Senate was going to be tougher than the House. We got there. We got pretty much what we wanted. It was it's an amazing package. It's the biggest bill ever passed if we get this done.
As the president wrote to my GOP friends in the House, stay united. Bottom line here, Joe and Savannah, this is in many ways a political gamble, not just for the president, but certainly for lawmakers as well. One that Democrats have already made clear they hope to make the Republicans and the president pay for in the midterms, about 17 months away.
It'll come quickly. All right, Peter, let's talk about the foreign policy front here. The president announced yesterday Israel has agreed to necessary conditions to finalize a 60-day ceasefire deal with Hamas. We know Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is set to visit Washington next week. Could this ceasefire actually happen?
Well, at the end of the day, this is going to be in the hands of Hamas right now to make up the final decision. There is yet, as you see, no response from Hamas at this time. The president said that Israel has agreed to the terms of the ceasefire right now. In effect, without knowing the specifics here, we know that the president has long been pushing for an agreement that would bring home the hostages still kept in Gaza right now, said to be dozens, about 50 at this time. Unclear how many of them are still living. And the Gazan people would benefit, the president has insisted, by access to more resources, more aid that's needed after more than 50,000 Gazans have lost their lives since October 7th, several years ago now, where Israelis and others were slaughtered when Hamas entered into southern Israel at the time. We know that Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, the president's special envoy Steve Witkoff, had met with one of Netanyahu's deputies just yesterday ahead of this announcement. And we do separately know, as you said, that Bibi Netanyahu will be coming here to the White House on Monday of next week. We've also now learned that many hostage families have requested that the prime minister bring them with him when he visits with President Trump early next week.
Peter, one other thing we do want to ask you to cover for us this morning. We just learned overnight that Paramount, that's the company that owns CBS and also the show 60 Minutes, has agreed to pay $16 million to settle a lawsuit brought by President Trump. He alleged in an interview last year that his former rival, Kamala Harris, did this interview on CBS's 60 Minutes, and that it was deceptively edited in a way that helped her and hurt him. Walk us through this agreement.
Well, the bottom line is independent legal experts say that the White House, the president, really did not have a case here And many people have reinforced that argument, but we certainly know the situation with Paramount right now. They were in need of federal approval for a merger that the owner of Paramount is looking toward right now. So it appeared clear that she was open to an agreement of this kind. Ultimately, the bottom line is it was agreed to. We have now learned overnight $16 million, as you said, that will go toward President Trump's future presidential library. This is not going to sit well with many people within CBS News. Among other things, there will not be a statement of apology or regret from CBS, and they have also agreed that in the future they will release entire transcripts of interviews they do with presidents. The legal team for President Trump, a spokesperson telling me early this morning, this is, in their words, another win for the American people. Joe and Savannah.
All right, Peter Alexander, thank you very much.
Let's circle back to the president's domestic policy bill and get some analysis with Investopedia's editor-in-chief, Caleb Silver. Caleb, good to have you here with us. All right, so one of the biggest concerns we've heard from Democrats and some fiscal hawk Republicans about this bill is that it adds $3.2 trillion to the deficit, to the debt. I think a lot of us think of the debt as sort of this nebulous thing that we don't really have to worry about. But realistically, what kind of impact could that have on our economy?
Yeah, when you're talking about it right now, it's $36 trillion. If it goes up to $39, $40 trillion, it's the interest we pay to service that debt that really costs a lot of money to the government. And that's why you hear the president demanding that Fed Chair Powell lower interest rates, because we got to pay interest on our debt. But also, when you have such a massive deficit, it makes our bonds look riskier. It makes our dollar look riskier. If you've seen this plunge in the dollar and in bond yields, it's because there's less trust in the government because our deficit keeps on growing and we don't bring in enough money to service that debt. Why does it affect us as everyday Americans? Well, eventually, we're going to see interest rates remain high because we have to continue to service that growing debt. It's going to slow the economy.
Just a minute ago, when we were talking with Julie, we had some graphics up on the screen kind of showing the winners and the losers that come from this bill. Unsurprisingly, companies are cheering these big tax cuts, but what does it mean for lower-income Americans?
Yeah, well, they're not getting as big a break as wealthier Americans, especially wealthier Americans that own assets like stocks and real estate, because that SALT deduction, state and local real estate tax, that goes up to $40,000. That's helpful for people that own property. But if you look at what actually helps lower-income Americans, there is the no taxes on tips up to a certain amount, up to $25,000, no taxes on overtime pay. But there's going to be cuts to Medicare, and that could affect, as the reporter said, some 12 million Americans, and also cuts to food stamps. So the food stamp program affects a lot of Americans. Child care tax credit rises a little bit, but most of the benefits do favor the wealthy in this bill.
You mentioned Jerome Powell a moment ago, who the president recently called a moron. He's obviously very upset that he has not lowered the interest rates. The Fed has not done that. We heard from Chairman Powell yesterday basically saying if it weren't for the tariffs, that they likely would have lowered the interest rates by now. What do you make of Powell's comments? What does it tell us about what the Fed's thinking is right now?
Well, the Fed doesn't want to lower interest rates because it doesn't know yet the impact of these tariffs, because we've had a come-and-go policy on those. We don't actually know if they're going into place next week, a week from now, actually, on July 9th. And we haven't seen the impact pass through to prices quite yet. When you look at the headline data, and we do it here on the show all the time, headline data looks okay. Inflation at a reasonable place and the unemployment rate of 4.2%. We'll get a new jobs report tomorrow. But there's no reason to lower interest rates until you see the impact of those price increases. And if we don't see them, the economy, according to Powell, is in a decent place. They may have cut interest rates to stimulate it a couple of months ago or past meetings, but right now there's no reason to do so. We've also heard that they may appoint a new or announce a new Fed chair by the end of the year, a shadow Fed chair that could put some pressure on the Fed as well.
All right. Caleb Silver, good to have you with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Caleb. Well, in just a few hours, Bryan Kohberger, the man accused of fatally stabbing 4 college students in Idaho, is scheduled to appear in court to formally accept a plea deal that's now dividing the victims' families. Kohberger is expected to plead guilty for the murders of Ethan Chapin, Kaylee Gonzalez, Xana Kernodle, and Madison Mogen that happened back in 2022. As part of this apparent deal, Kohberger will spend the rest of his life in prison. That means he'll avoid the death penalty. While Ethan Chapin's family tells NBC News they support the deal, Kaylee Gonzalez's father says he feels blindsided and that prosecutors have given up.
Here in New York, the jury in the Sean Diddy Combs trial is set to continue deliberations today after reaching a partial verdict yesterday. Here's what we know as of this morning. That federal jury has unanimous verdicts on 4 of the 5 criminal counts in the federal sex trafficking trial, but they still remain divided on the lone count of racketeering conspiracy. The jury sent the judge a note saying that there were, quote, unpersuadable views on both sides for that one count. The judge urged the jurors to resume their deliberations, which they will do today. NBC News entertainment correspondent Chloe Malas has been following the case from inside the courtroom and brings us the latest details.
We've reached a verdict on counts 2, 3, 4, and 5. Read the note from the jury that came just after 4 o'clock. But we cannot reach a verdict on count 1, they wrote, because some jurors have unpersuadable views. That means they've reached a unanimous decision on whether Sean Diddy Combs is guilty of sex trafficking and transportation to engage in prostitution. But the jury of 8 men and 4 women is split on the most serious and complex charge, racketeering conspiracy. For that count, jurors must decide whether they believe Combs ran a criminal organization and committed underlying crimes like kidnapping and arson. The judge urging the jury to keep deliberating, to try to reach a decision on that last count before revealing their verdict. As the jury's note came in, Combs' attorneys hugged and formed a circle around the music mogul, who put his head in his hands, at one point giving a thumbs up to his family. During the 7-week trial, prosecutors alleged that the music mogul ran a criminal enterprise and used power, violence, and fear to get what he wanted. Calling 34 witnesses, including 2 of Combs' former girlfriends, Cassie Ventura and another known only as Jane. Combs opting not to testify, his defense team calling no witnesses, telling the jury that the claims against Combs were badly exaggerated and that physical abuse and love of baby oil are not federal crimes. Chloe Malas, NBC News, New York.
Well, we have NBC News legal analyst Angela Sanadella joining us for more on the case. Angela, good morning. Thanks so much for being here. So let's start, of course, with this jury note that we just heard about there, saying that they have these unpersuadable views on one of these charges. Give us some details on what you're taking away from this information. The fact that we do have this decision on these other counts, any inkling what that may be, given the landscape of this and what might happen with that one count?
Yeah, so I think that that means that it is most likely that those counts 2 through 5 are guilty verdicts, right? Maybe not all of them. It's possible they could split. It's possible they believe one victim's testimony, like Cassie's, but maybe didn't believe the others. Because remember, the defense here was that these women were greedy and that all these acts were consensual. So they could definitely split on those. But the reason why I think there is at least some guilty verdict is because the government was alleging that was the point of the whole conspiracy, that that was the end goal, that those were the bad acts that were being committed. But the RICO charge, the racketeering charge, which is count 1, and that's the one that they have unpersuadable views on at this point, is the system. So the government was alleging there's a whole system and a process in place to do these bad acts. And so if they're trying to get to the system and decide, is there really a system or not, it is likely they do think those bad acts happen, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does.
Let's talk more about that racketeering conspiracy. It's a federal law. It was originally meant to go after, like, organized crime. So we think about things like the mafia, but it's being used much more widely by prosecutors. What do you think could be about that is making it so complicated for the jurors to try and decide on that one?
So I actually think what makes it very complicated is that the jurors and everybody does associate it with the mob. So with the mob, classically, there's a hierarchical structure, and every single person in that structure knows exactly what the point of it is, right? It's not actually trucking, it is to commit illegal crimes. But when we think about Diddy, we all know he is also this global superstar, and that this industry around him, this entourage, these people, were also part of that global superstar industry. Now, that said, the definition of racketeering does not require all of the business to be illegitimate. It's possible to have legitimate and illegitimate, but that's very confusing to the jury.
Absolutely. Okay, so jury's been at it for a little over 13 hours. Yesterday, the judge, our viewers may have heard this term Allen charge being thrown around, sort of like a modified Allen charge, basically said, you got to go back and keep working on it. How many times, how long does the judge keep doing that before they just take what they've got on these other charges?
So like most of these things, it's up to the judge's discretion, right? But traditionally, it's not more than like one more time. And this is why. It's because the judge can really encourage and empower. And that's what he's doing. He's saying, guys, you got this. You can do it. You can come to a decision. But they cannot force one at all. And if they do that, that does infringe upon the defendant's right to a fair trial, right? So the more that the judge tries to force a verdict, that means that then the defense has more grounds for possible appeal. So he's likely going to encourage them again, but maybe not many more times.
He doesn't want to go,
right?
He doesn't want to tell them too many times.
Yeah, really good information. Angela, thank you so much.
Let's take a look outside here in New York, where it's a little bit overcast. We've seen some light rain to start the day, but looks like things are going to clear up later on, most importantly by the 4th of July as the storm system moves south this morning.
Yesterday we saw less light rain, which was the same hour that I was outside, so that was fun. Angie Lassman, good morning. What do we got for the weekend?
Oh, did somebody not bring their umbrella yesterday like I mentioned, Savannah?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, today you're not going to need it, especially if you're going to be out and about in the second half of the day and you live in the Northeast. We're going to see this drying trend. We're waking up to still some of these showers kind of hanging around, stretching down to the mid-Atlantic, along the Gulf Coast and parts of the southern plains. And some of those spots are going to see improved conditions today, and others are going to keep this kind of pattern going as we get into even the holiday weekend. And one of those places that's going to keep it going is the Southeast. You see this front? That's the one that was responsible for all that heavy rain across the Northeast yesterday. And leaving us unsettled at points farther south. And today, it's working a little farther to the east and south, eventually offshore the farther north you go, but still leaving us with the potential for some of this heavy rain across parts of the coastal mid-Atlantic region and down through the southeast and along the Gulf Coast. That is going to be out of the picture here as we get into tomorrow, but notice what's right behind it, this next front that's going to leave us with a couple of showers that we have to deal with. They'll be widely scattered across parts of the Northeast, but something to note for your Thursday. When it comes to the delays and the travel issues that we saw a whole lot of yesterday, they're going to be less so today. We do have a couple spots specifically across the state of Florida and the East Coast where you could see maybe some iffy conditions and potentially some delays. But even as we get into tomorrow, those are going to be confined really to essentially Florida and parts of the Southeast, maybe a couple of showers being impacting the travel across New York and the Great Lakes. But really, the weather looks pretty good by all standards when we look at the big picture for 4th of July specifically. Notice all the sunshine on the map. We've got it in Boston, New York, Washington will be in the 80s in all of those locations. 90s for Chicago and St. Louis, still dealing with the sunshine there. And then out west, still sunny and hot. It's just a couple of spots, the upper Midwest, that we see some of this heavy rain and parts of Florida. So heads up for those locations. You could see some difficulty. And even on the backside of the holiday, as we wrap up the weekend, doesn't look all that bad. We'll watch for maybe some delays across Florida and potentially in Chicago. But how about the fireworks? Things look pretty good by all standards. Again, we've got a lot of clear skies overhead across the country, guys. We'll maybe watch for some strong storms for the upper Midwest, but otherwise clear and mild for the Northeast and hot and muggy down from the Great Lakes all the way to the Gulf Coast.
I am very excited for the 4th of July.
Me too, especially with a forecast like this.
Me too. Thank you, Angie. Yay,
Yay.
Angie.
Applause.
Okay, well, you're probably thinking about the weather for the 4th. Also, maybe wondering if it's a beach day. Unfortunately, we've got a new warning from health officials that may put those plans on hold.
Yeah, some states across the country are closing off swimming at beaches because of high bacteria levels.
Oh, joining us now for more on what these closures mean is NBC News medical contributor Dr. Natalie Azar. Good morning, doctor. So the CDC warning that bacteria, it's known as Vibrio, am I saying that right? It's what's typically found in seawater. What do we need to know about this and how concerned should people be?
Yeah, I'm sorry to rain on Angie's parade. The weather looks amazing, but we do have a health warning from officials, and that's because a lot of beaches around our country are showing higher counts of the bacteria Vibrio, as you mentioned. We see about 80,000 Vibrio infections every year. Over half of them are associated with actually eating contaminated seafood, undercooked or raw shellfish, but many of them are also from contaminated water, such as the ocean water. And the biggest concern, guys, is if you have an open wound and you go into the water, that can be very, very dangerous. You can get quite a serious wound infection. If you eat food that's contaminated with Vibrio, you can get quite sick with a significant gastrointestinal illness, nausea, diarrhea, vomiting, and that sort of thing. So you need to be on alert and make sure you're listening to local officials about what beaches are affected.
Yeah, so who is most at risk for actually being infected by this bacteria?
Joe, it's the groups that we normally talk about. So people who are immunocompromised are at greater risk. And as I mentioned, it is something to be aware of if you do have an open wound. Maybe you just had surgery and there's a scar or a wound that's healing. Even drippings from raw or undercooked seafood can contaminate those wounds. Anyone can get infected with Vibrio at any time. If you eat something, if you or I eats oysters, for example, are one of the biggest culprits, we can get sick with the Vibrio gastroenteritis.
Dr. Azar, as we mentioned, several states have closed off swimming at beaches because of this. What can people do to stay safe if they're still planning to hit the beach this weekend, or if they're just maybe their beach isn't on this list, but they're hearing hearing this and they're concerned.
Yeah, look, I mean, if your beach is not on the list, you can feel pretty assured that you can go and swim in the water. Again, not with an open wound or any sort of open area on the skin that is healing. If you are planning on eating, is a really obviously, as we get into the summer, a lot of people enjoy, seafood. You need to make sure that, especially with oysters, that they are cooked to 145 degrees Fahrenheit for at least 15 seconds. Make sure that the oysters you're getting are from a reputable source.
Good advice.
Great advice. Dr. Azar, thank you so much.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.